day, the Black Dragon spoke. Sergeant Halking had 6 seconds to get his men flat before a freight train fell through the sky. The voice on the radio had been calm, impossibly calm for what it was saying. 16-inch inbound, danger close, time of flight 90 seconds, get down now. He didn't understand what 16-inch meant, not yet. He knew it was big, knew it was coming from the New Jersey. The battleship, someone said, was 25 miles offshore. But 6 seconds from now, when the sound hit, not the explosion, the sound of the shells cutting through the air, he would understand that some things are too massive to be called weapons. They're events. They're the kind of force that changes what your body knows about how the world works. Down, everybody flat, mouths open, ears covered. He was screaming it, grabbing Morrison by the vest, throwing him into the mud. The kid still had the radio handset pressed to his ear, like he couldn't believe what he'd just heard. Like maybe if he stayed on the line, the voice would take it back, say it was a mistake, say help was coming some other way that didn't involve danger close and 90 seconds and get down now. Around them, 31 men pressed themselves into the wet earth of a valley that didn't have a name on any map. North of the DMZ, the place where Vietnam stopped being a country and became just jungle and death, and the kind of terrain that swallowed entire units and never gave them back. They'd been here 2 days. They were supposed to be here 2 more. Standard recon sweep. Move through, observe, report, extract. Simple. Except nothing was simple anymore, because 10 minutes ago, they'd walked into a company of NVA, maybe more. And now they were surrounded, pinned down, taking fire from 3 sides. And the only thing between them and dying in this nameless valley was a voice on the radio saying, "Stand by," saying help is coming, saying get down. 5 seconds. Sergeant Halking's face was in the mud. He could taste it, mineral and rot, the jungle floor that never dried, never got clean, just decomposed everything that touched it, and waited for more. His hands were over his ears, but he kept his mouth open. Someone had told him that once, some old gunny who'd survived artillery barrages in Korea. Keep your mouth open, or the pressure wave will blow out your eardrums from the inside. He didn't know if it was true. Didn't matter. Right now, he'd try anything. 4 seconds. He thought about Morrison, 20 years old, from Iowa. Wrote letters to a girl named Sarah every night. Long letters about what he was gonna do when he got home, how they'd get married, how he'd never leave her again. Morrison, who'd kept his voice steady on the radio, even when the bullets were snapping through the leaves overhead, even when it was clear nobody was coming, even when the LT's face had gone pale and empty in that way that meant he knew they were all about to die. Morrison, who'd somehow raised a ship from the dead, called down a ghost from World War II, and convinced it to care about 32 men in a jungle 25 miles away. 3 seconds. The NVA were still out there, still shooting, still pressing forward through the jungle, trying to close the distance before whatever the Americans had called in could arrive. They didn't know, couldn't know, because if they knew what was coming, they'd be running. They'd be throwing down their weapons and sprinting for anywhere that wasn't here, wasn't this valley, wasn't the grid coordinates that Morrison had read off the map with shaking hands, while Sergeant Halking held the flashlight and prayed the numbers were right. 2 seconds. Sergeant Halking heard Jackson, the machine gunner, the kid with the picture of his daughter that he showed everyone, The kid who was supposed to rotate out next month. Heard him whisper something. Couldn't make out the words. Maybe a prayer. Maybe just a name. Emily. That was the daughter's name. 3 years old. Blonde hair. Jackson had shown him the picture that morning. That morning when they'd eaten cold sea rats and complained about the weather and thought this would be just another day of walking through jungle and seeing nothing and going home tired but alive. 1 second. The sound came first, not the explosion. The sound of the shells. Plural. He'd learn later it was 9 rounds, 9 shells, each weighing as much as a Volkswagen, each one moving faster than sound itself until the last few seconds when physics caught up and the air couldn't get out of the way fast enough. The sound of them tearing through the atmosphere was something his brain refused to process as real. It was too big, too wrong, like the sky itself was screaming, like God had grabbed the fabric of the world and was ripping it in half. A freight train, that's what everyone said afterward, sounded like a freight train falling out of the sky. But that wasn't right. Trains had rhythm, had a pattern, had the comfortable mechanical sound of human engineering doing what it was designed to do. This was chaos. This was violence. This was the sound of air being murdered. Sergeant Halking's whole body locked up, every muscle tensed, trying to make itself smaller, harder, trying to compress into something that could survive what was coming. His teeth were clenched despite the open mouth, his eyes squeezed shut, his hands pressed so hard over his ears that his skull ached. And still the sound got through. Not through his ears, through his bones, through his chest, through every part of him that was solid enough to vibrate. The impact hit like a physical blow. The ground didn't shake, it jumped, lifted, became liquid for a moment, rolling in waves like the ocean, like the earth itself had forgotten it was supposed to be solid. The impact hit like a physical blow. Trees. Massive hardwoods that had stood for 50 years, 100 years. Trees with trunks thicker than a man's chest, bent, snapped, flew apart into splinters and pulp. The air compressed, a pressure wave that traveled faster than sound, that hit before the explosion registered, that squeezed Sergeant Halking's chest like a giant hand trying to crush his ribs. He couldn't breathe. The air was gone, sucked away by the blast, and for a moment, just a moment, but it felt like drowning, there was nothing to inhale, just vacuum, just emptiness where oxygen used to be. His lungs spasmed, his vision went red, then black around the edges. And then the air rushed back in, superheated, full of smoke and debris and the chemical smell of high explosives, and he gasped it in, and it burned going down, but he didn't care because he was breathing, he was alive, they were alive. The Hilltop was gone, not damaged, not destroyed, gone, erased. Where there had been a hill, a tactical position, high ground, the place where the NVA had been setting up their mortars and their command post, there was now a crater, raw earth, exposed rock, trees that had been there for decades just absent, ceased to exist. And around the crater, for 200 meters in every direction, the jungle was flattened, shredded, turned into matchsticks and mulch. The NVA soldiers who'd been there, the ones who'd been shooting at 'em, the ones who'd been pressing forward to finish the job. Sergeant Halking didn't think about 'em, couldn't, because thinking about what happened to a human body at ground zero of a 16-inch shell was the kind of thought that doesn't go away. Silence. not real silence. His ears were ringing, a high whine that would last for hours, maybe days. And in the distance, sounds filtered through. Trees falling, delayed, their roots finally given up. Small rocks and debris pattering down like rain. Somewhere, a secondary explosion, as something the NVA had been carrying cooked off in the heat. But compared to the sound before, compared to the roar of those shells, this was silence. This was the world holding its breath. Morrison's voice cracked through the radio. New Jersey, Recon 3 Alpha. Target destroyed. The hill is gone. I say again, the hill is... His voice broke. He wasn't crying, not quite, but close. You erased it. You erased it. The calm voice responded. Same tone, same professional distance. Like erasing a hilltop was just part of the job. Copy, Recon 3 Alpha. Standing by for additional fire missions if required. Glad we could help. New Jersey out. Glad we could help. Like they'd just given directions to a gas station. Like they hadn't just reached across 25 miles of ocean and jungle and deleted a piece of the earth from existence. Sergeant Halking started laughing. Couldn't help it. It wasn't funny. Nothing about this was funny. But the absurdity of that phrase, glad we could help, in the context of what had just happened, broke something loose in his chest, and the laughter came out jagged and wrong, and he couldn't stop it. Jackson was crying, actually crying, tears cutting tracks through the mud on his face. He wasn't making noise, just sitting there with his M60 across his lap, staring at the space where the hill used to be, tears running down. Other men were checking themselves, patting their bodies like they couldn't believe all the pieces were still there. Someone was puking. Someone else was praying in Spanish, rapid-fire words that ran together. And the LT, Lieutenant Garrison, 24 years old, 6 weeks in country, still believing that following the book would keep everyone alive. The LT was just sitting in the mud with his map in his hands, staring at nothing. The firefight was over. The NVA who'd survived, and there had to be some, had to be men on the edges who'd been far enough away to live through it. They were gone, running. Because what do you do when the earth itself becomes your enemy? When the hill you were using for cover just stops existing? When you realize the Americans can reach out from beyond the horizon and erase you, you run, you scatter. You want nothing to do with this place, this valley, this grid coordinate where physics stopped making sense. But 2 days ago, 2 days that felt like 2 years, they'd been fine. The insertion had been smooth. Huey dropped him at dawn. Quick exit. Rotor wash flattening the elephant grass as they jumped out and moved into the tree line. Standard stuff. The kind of mission they'd all done before. The LT had been nervous. He was always nervous. But that was okay. Better a nervous LT who double-checked everything than an overconfident one who got people killed. Sergeant Halking had been doing this for 9 months. Not forever, but long enough to know the rhythms, to read the jungle, to sense when something was off. And from the moment they moved into the valley, something was off. The jungle was too quiet. Not peaceful quiet, predator quiet. The kind of stillness that meant everything with a survival instinct had gone still, hoping not to be noticed. Birds should have been calling. Monkeys should have been crashing through the canopy. But there was nothing. Just silence and the sound of 32 men trying to move quietly through terrain that fought them every step. He'd tried to tell the LT, "Sir, This feels wrong. We should consider aborting." Garrison had looked at him with those young eyes, that mix of fear and determination that came from knowing your men were watching, judging, waiting to see if you'd break. "We have our orders, Sergeant. Command wants eyes on this valley. We complete the mission." "Sir, I'm not questioning the orders. I'm saying the valley's compromised." "Something's here. Something big. You see enemy activity?" "No, sir, but..." "Then we continue. Stay alert. Keep interval. We'll be fine." That was the problem with new officers. They thought the book would save them. Thought that following procedure, maintaining discipline, trust in the plan would somehow armor them against the chaos. And sometimes it did. Sometimes the book was right. But sometimes the book got you killed because it couldn't account for instinct, for the animal part of your brain that knew danger before your conscious mind could articulate why. They'd moved deeper into the valley, set up observation posts, rotated watch. By nightfall of the first day, Sergeant Halking had almost convinced himself he was wrong. Maybe it was just nerves. Maybe the jungle was quiet for normal reasons, weather, season, random chance. Maybe he was getting paranoid, seeing threats that weren't there. And then, on the morning of the second day, they'd found the trail. Not a game trail, not a footpath, a supply trail. Wide enough for porters carrying heavy loads. Fresh, recent. Signs of dozens of men, maybe more, moving through within the last 48 hours. The LT had called it in, reported the finding, requested instructions. And command, some major sitting in an air-conditioned operations center 50 miles away, had said, "Continue observation, gather more intel, maintain position." Sergeant Halking had known right then they were in trouble. Because you don't stumble onto a major supply trail by accident. The NVA didn't build these things randomly. They were part of a network, a system. And if there was a trail this established, this active, there were people protecting it. Lots of people. He'd said as much to the LT. "Sir, we need to extract, now. If they're using this trail, they're gonna have security, patrols, maybe a permanent presence. We're too exposed." Garrison had shaken his head. "Command wants more information. Troop strength, supply types, direction of travel. We stay another 24 hours. "Sir." "That's an order, Sergeant." And there it was, the wall. The point where rank trumped experience, where hierarchy overrode common sense. Sergeant Halking could have pushed, could have made it a thing, a confrontation, could have forced the LT to either listen or officially reprimand him. But that wasn't how it worked. You didn't undermine your officers in front of the men. You didn't break the chain of command, even when the chain was leading you toward disaster. You saluted, you said yes, sir, and you did your job. And if the decision was wrong, if people died because of it, you lived with that. Or you didn't live with it. One or the other. So they'd stayed, set up better hide positions, maintained radio silence except for scheduled check-ins, watched the trail. And for 23 hours, nothing happened. The trail stayed empty. The jungle stayed quiet. Sergeant Halking started to think maybe he'd been wrong. Maybe the trail was old, abandoned. Maybe they'd get through this after all. And then, 47 minutes before their scheduled extraction, the NVA had walked right into them. Not a patrol, a company, maybe more. Moving in column formation, weapons ready, alert. They'd been using the trail, following it north, and somehow, bad luck, bad timing, bad everything, they'd gotten close enough to the American position that someone on point had spotted something, a reflection off a rifle scope, movement in the brush, something. And suddenly, both sides knew the other was there, and the jungle exploded into fire. The first burst of AK fire hit Morrison's radio. Not Morrison, the radio strapped to his back. Sparks, smoke. The handset went dead in Sergeant Halking's hand. Their link to the world, their lifeline, just gone, cut. And the NVA were pressing hard, professional, coordinated, trying to close the distance before the Americans could organize a defense. Garrison had done well in those first seconds. Credit where it was due. The kid didn't freeze. He'd started barking orders, getting men into position, establishing fields of fire. Jackson had his M60 up and running, pouring rounds into the tree line, forcing the NVA to take cover. And for maybe 90 seconds, they held, kept the enemy at bay, made them pay for every meter. But they were outnumbered, badly, and the NVA weren't stopping, weren't breaking off. They wanted this, wanted to finish it before American air support, and the platoon's ammunition wasn't infinite. Sergeant Halking could hear the M16s shifting from full auto to controlled bursts to single shots as men realized they needed to make every round count. Could see the grenade pouches emptying. Could feel the math adding up to a conclusion nobody wanted to face. Morrison had gotten the backup radio working. Smaller, older, temperamental, but functional. He'd started calling for help. Dust off, gunships, airstrikes, artillery, anything. And the responses had come back negative, negative, negative. Weather too low for helicopters. Fast movers couldn't see through the clouds. Artillery out of range. They were on the edge of everything. Too far north for the fire bases to reach. Too exposed for safe helicopter operations. Too deep in Indian country for anyone to risk a rescue. "Keep trying," Sergeant Halking had told him. "Someone's out there. Someone can reach us." But even as he said it, he hadn't believed it. They were alone, and alone meant dead. It was just a question of how long they could make the NVA pay before it was over. That's when Morrison had thought of the Navy. "Sarge, what about the ships? The Navy's got ships offshore, right? Can they reach us?" Sergeant Halking had looked at him like he was crazy. "We're 25 miles inland, Morrison. Naval guns can't—" And then he stopped, because he remembered. The briefing, weeks ago, that most of them had ignored because it seemed irrelevant. Something about the New Jersey being reactivated, brought out of mothballs, deployed to Vietnam for fire support. He'd thought it was propaganda, a publicity stunt. Who brings a battleship to a guerrilla war? "Try it," he'd said. "Call the Navy. Call anyone. Just try." Morrison had cycled through frequencies, putting out a distress call, and Halking had gone back to shooting, to moving, to keeping his men alive for one more minute, one more magazine, one more breath. He hadn't expected anything, hadn't let himself hope. But when that voice came through, calm, American, older, with the kind of certainty that comes from men who know exactly what they're capable of, something shifted. "Station calling for fire support. This is USS New Jersey. We copy your position. What do you need?" Morrison had almost dropped the handset. His voice had cracked when he responded. "New Jersey, Recon 3 Alpha. We are in heavy contact. Company strength NVA, taking fire from multiple directions. We need immediate fire support. He rattled off the coordinates, reading them twice to make sure. And Halking had listened to the exchange with something like awe, because this shouldn't be possible. A battleship from World War II, sitting somewhere over the horizon, about to reach into their nightmare and pull 'em out. The voice had asked about friendly positions, about danger close parameters, about what kind of target they were engaging, and Morrison had answered everything, professional despite the fear, despite the chaos around him. And then the voice had said it. Copy all. Stand by for 16-inch. Time of flight 90 seconds. Danger close. Get your heads down. 90 seconds. Sergeant Halking had started counting immediately. Started screaming at his men to get flat, to cover up, to prepare for something none of them had ever experienced. And the LT, Garrison, had looked at him with confusion and fear and said, "What's 16-inch? What's coming?" Sergeant Halking hadn't known how to answer, 'cause how do you explain something you've never seen? How do you tell someone that the largest naval rifles ever put on a warship are about to fire, that each shell weighs over a ton, that they're traveling at speeds that make them more like meteors than bullets? You can't. You just say, "Get down," and hope everyone listens. The NVA had kept coming during those 90 seconds, kept shooting, kept trying to overrun the position before whatever the Americans had called in could arrive. Some of them probably knew. The older ones, the ones who'd fought the French, who'd been through Dien Bien Phu, who understood what naval gunfire support meant. They were probably trying to pull back, trying to get their men away, but there wasn't time. 90 seconds isn't enough time to recognize danger and react and move and escape. It's barely enough time to realize you're about to die. And then the sound had come, and the impact, and the Hilltop had ceased to exist. Now, sitting in the mud, ears ringing, body shaking from adrenaline and shock, Sergeant Halking looked around at his men. All of them alive. Some wounded, nothing serious, just cuts and bruises from flying debris, but alive. Every single one of them. 32 men who'd been seconds from death, who'd been writing their last thoughts, who'd been looking at each other thinking, "This is it. This is how it ends." And now they were alive because someone 25 miles away had listened, had cared, had reached across impossible distance and pulled them back from the edge. The extraction came 2 hours later. Hugh is punching through the weather, landing in a clearing half a click away, pulling them out. Nobody talked much on the flight back. What was there to say? How do you process something like that? How do you integrate it into your understanding of the world? The debriefing was brief. Garrison gave his report. Coordinates, enemy strength, engagement timeline, casualties, 0 KIA, 3 WIA minor. Fire support from USS New Jersey, effect devastating. Mission successful. The S2 officer had nodded, made notes, filed it away. Just another mission. Just another day in the war. Nothing unusual. Nothing that required follow-up or recognition or acknowledgement that something extraordinary had happened. But Halking had kept his own record. Written it down that night in his hooch, sitting under a mosquito net with a flashlight and a notebook he'd bought at the PX. Not the tactical details, the human part, the fear, the desperation, the sound, the impossible fact that someone had heard their voice and answered. He wrote, "That night it wasn't metal that saved us. It was the idea that someone, even far away, still heard our voice, still cared enough to answer. The New Jersey didn't win the war. It couldn't. It was just a ship, just a weapon. But for 32 men in a valley that doesn't even have a name on the maps, it was proof that we weren't forgotten, that we still mattered. He never showed it to anyone, never tried to publish it or make it public. It was just for him, a way to process, a way to remember. Because he knew that wars don't care about individual moments, don't care about 32 men in a valley. Wars are about strategy and objectives and political outcomes. And by those measures, Vietnam was already being lost. But that didn't make his moment meaningless, didn't erase the fact that for those 90 seconds and for the years after, he lived because someone had done their job right. The New Jersey finished her deployment and went back into mothballs. The war continued, the protests grew, the body count climbed, and eventually America left. The South fell. Saigon became Ho Chi Minh City. Everything they'd fought for evaporated in the chaos of those final days. And for a long time, that failure poisoned everything, made it seem like all of it had been pointless. All the sacrifice, all the courage, all the moments where someone did something right, washed away in the larger narrative of failure. But Halking never saw it that way. He'd learned something in that valley, something the critics and protesters and politicians would never understand because they hadn't been there. He'd learned that big things, wars, strategies, political objectives, those were made of small moments. Moments where people made choices, where someone listened, where someone cared, where someone reached out. And those moments mattered even when the big thing failed. Maybe especially when the big thing failed. Because otherwise, what was the point? If the only things that mattered were the outcomes, the victories, the successful wars, then most of human effort was meaningless. But if the small moments counted, if saving 32 men mattered, even though the war was lost, then maybe there was still something worth believing in. Years later, long after he'd come home, long after he'd tried to build a normal life, Halking went to see the New Jersey. She was a museum now, moored in Camden, open to the public. He walked the decks, looked at the guns, read the plaques. Other tourists took pictures, talked about how big everything was, moved on to the next exhibit. But Halking stood in front of Turret 2, the one that had fired that night, though he'd never know for certain, and tried to imagine the men who'd served it. The fire control technicians calculating trajectories, the gunners loading shells that weighed more than they did, the officers given the order to fire, knowing that somewhere over the horizon people were dependent on them to be right. He wanted to thank them, wanted to find every person who'd been aboard that night and shake their hands and tell them what it meant. But he didn't know their names, didn't have a way to find them. Most of them probably didn't even remember that specific fire mission. It was just one night out of many during the deployment. Just another set of coordinates, another target, another mission completed. So he stood there in silence, and after a while, he pulled out a piece of paper, wrote a note, just a few lines, found a museum staff member, asked if there was a place to leave it, maybe added to the veteran testimonials they kept in the archives. The staff member said sure, they'd file it. Sergeant Halking didn't care if they displayed it or not. He just needed to write it down, needed to say it, even if the people he was saying it to would never read it. The note said, "To the crew of USS New Jersey, November 1968. You saved 32 lives that night. You probably don't remember us. We were just a voice on the radio. But we remember you. We remember the calm voice saying, 'Stand by.' We remember the 90 seconds waiting. We remember the sound. We remember going home. Thank you. You gave us a chance. Some of us made it, and we never forgot. He walked out of the museum thinking about all the ways the war had changed him. The nightmares, the hypervigilance, the inability to feel safe even in places that should be safe. The weight of memories that never got lighter no matter how many years passed. But he also thought about what he'd learned. That courage isn't the absence of fear. That heroism isn't always visible. That sometimes the most important thing you can do is just be there, be present, be the voice that answers when someone calls for help. His grandson found the notebook years later, after Halking had gotten too old to protest, too tired to hide it. Read through it, asked questions, wanted to know more. And Sergeant Halking, who'd never talked about the war, who'd spent decades keeping it locked away, finally told the story. Not the sanitized version, not the version that made it noble or meaningful or less brutal than it was. Just what happened. The fear, the desperation, the impossible salvation, the cost. Did it change anything? His grandson asked. Did that moment, that ship, did it change the war? Sergeant Halking had thought about that for a long time before answering. No, he finally said, it didn't change the war. The war was always going to end the way it ended. But it changed me. Changed 32 men who got to go home instead of dying in a valley nobody's ever heard of. And for those men, and for the families who got them back, and for the lives they built afterward, that wasn't nothing. That was everything. The official record is easy to find. The New Jersey's deployment, her fire missions, the tonnage delivered, the targets destroyed, all documented, cataloged, preserved. But that's not the whole story. That's just a skeleton. The real story is in the spaces between the numbers, in Morrison's voice cracking on the radio, in Jackson's tears, in Garrison's face when he realized they were gonna live, in Halking's hands shaking as he wrote in his notebook by flashlight, in all the small human moments that don't make it into after-action reports, but are the only things that actually matter when you're the one living through them. This is that story, not the official one, the one where 32 men were about to die, and someone listened, someone answered, someone reached across 25 miles and said, "We've got you. Stand by. Help is coming." And help came. Not because it was easy, not because the ship was designed for it, not because the mission plan called for it, but because when a scared kid in a jungle called for help, someone on the other end of that radio decided to care, decided to try, decided that 32 lives mattered enough to make it work. Because that's what separates civilization from chaos. Not technology, not strategy, not power. Just the simple human decision to help when someone asks, to listen when someone calls, to reach out when someone's fallen, even when it's hard, even when it's dangerous, even when nobody will ever know you did it. You help, you listen, you reach out, because that's what humans do. That's what makes us worth saving in the first place. The New Jersey fired her guns that night and a race to Hilltop. But what she really did was prove that someone was still listening. That the machinery of war, for all its brutality and waste and horror, still had people inside it who remembered why they were there, who understood that the point wasn't the killing. The point was bringing people home. And sometimes, when everything went right, when the coordinates were accurate and the calculations were perfect, and the men on the ship did their jobs with skill and care and precision, that actually happened. People came home, lives were saved, families stayed whole. 32 men walked out of that valley. They scattered after the war, went their separate ways, built their separate lives. Most of them never spoke about it, never tried to find each other, never formed the kind of reunions that some units did. But they all remembered. Remembered Morrison's voice, remembered the 90 seconds, remembered the sound, remembered the impossible fact that they were alive. And somewhere, in archives and attics and forgotten boxes, there are 32 different versions of that story. 32 perspectives on the same moment. Some of them written down, some of them just carried silently. Memory worn smooth by the years, but never lost. And if you collected all 32, if you laid them side by side and read through them, you'd see the same themes: the fear, the desperation, the voice on the radio, the sound, the silence after, the impossible fact of survival, and underneath it all, the same recognition. Someone heard us, someone answered, someone cared. That's the story, not the technical details, not the strategic assessment, not the historical analysis, just the human fact of it. The moment where connection happened across distance, where one group of people in danger called out, and another group of people far away decided to help. And help came, and lives were saved. And years later, when everything else about the war had faded into argument and bitterness and the complicated mess of history, that moment remained clear, pure, undeniable. Someone heard, someone answered, someone helped, and 32 men came home.